Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Here's a Wild Thought. We're about 2.5 weeks into Trump 2.0, or the Elon Musk shadow presidency, depending on how you want to look at it, and it's going about as well as everyone thought it would go. A lot of chaos has happened in the last few weeks. Immigration, deportations, and tariffs that were issued and then not issued, government agencies being shut down, FBI agents being fired. It's a whole mess of stuff that's going on, and it's just about as messy as everyone knew it would be. I don't want to talk about all that stuff here. I'm not doing this show to talk about all of the mess that's gone on in the last 2.5 weeks. I'm bored with it already. What I want to talk about is one of the complaints that has been going on in especially the last week or two, as the chaos ensues. And it's, where are the Democrats? Why aren't they out fighting, making noise, doing what they can do to try to stop it? A lot of people have been asking that question, and I haven't really entertained it because I'm old enough to remember 2017 and 2005 when Republicans won elections and Democrats were in the wilderness, and the same questions were asked even then. There were a lot of people who, in 2005, myself included, because I was a 21-year-old college student, who felt the Democrats were not doing enough to fight against George W. Bush in the first weeks and days of his administration. And the strategy the Democrats had back then was to wait it out. Wait to see what Bush does, wait to see what develops, because Bush was popular. It's hard to fight against somebody who's popular because people don't trust you or believe you and tend to side with the popular leader. Democrats waited it out, and very quickly the tide turned against the Bush administration. The very first thing that happened in 2005 was the Terri Schiavo case, and if you don't know that story, very quickly, Terri Schiavo was a woman who was in a vegetative state in Florida, and she had been in that state for over a decade at this point, and her husband, who had remarried at that point and moved on, wanted to take her off of life support because there was no hope of her getting better. Schiavo's parents wanted to keep her on life support, and so a legal battle ensued between Schiavo's parents and Schiavo's husband over who had the right to decide on Terri Schiavo's care. It got to the point where the Bush administration and Congress actually stepped in to try to control the situation themselves and hand over power to Schiavo's parents, and the public responded negatively to it. They became rather unpopular. The decision to intervene was unpopular. People didn't like it. They didn't think that was a place for the government to get involved. And it began to sort of change the vibe against the Bush administration. Later that year, as 2005 went on, the Iraq War went badly. Bush tried to privatize Social Security. That ended up turning out badly. It didn't get passed, and the public was very bitter on it. Hurricane Katrina happened. One of his Supreme Court appointments failed. So there was a whole litany of things that had happened over the course of 2005 that made Bush unpopular, and Democrats pounced on each one of them over time, rather than come out of the gate in full opposition, flooding the field with total opposition and total resistance the way that Democrats did in 2017. They decided to sort of wait it out. And I think it was the right move in hindsight. It wasn't one that I necessarily agreed with at the time, but I was only a 21-year-old college kid. But I think it was the right decision. Opposition depends on what had happened in the election. I think the 2017 opposition, the way that the resistance kind of just flooded everything in the first year, it made sense at the time because Trump didn't win the popular vote. Hillary Clinton did. It was such a close election that it was easy to see that Trump didn't really have legitimacy that he has now. And so it's not as easy to do this, to repeat the 2017 experience in 2025. Now, I've been a bit of a polemicist on this, where I've accused the left of working hard to get Trump back because they want the resistance back. But I do think there's some truth to that. And I think a lot of people expected that Trump would reinvigorate the opposition to give us back the type of resistance that we had in the late 2010s. I don't think it's going to happen, not to the same extent that it happened then. There will be little burst of this, and you're seeing it right now, but Democrats have come to the conclusion that the long-term effect of their all-out, very loud and boisterous opposition and the resistance from 2017 to 2019 ended up boomeranging on them in the end. It ended up backfiring on them. And I think they're looking at those years and saying, we exhausted everybody and we didn't stop him, right? We did defeat him in 2020, but that was largely because of the pandemic. He almost won. This is sort of a good example of the concept of, if you come for the king, you best not miss. Democrats in the first Trump term, and even in the last few years with him out of power, they would come for him in every possible way that they possibly can. And they kept missing. And I think what started to happen over time is that they made Trump look more powerful than he actually is. They made him look invincible. They made him look unassailable. And I think people grew to respect that and like that and feel that maybe God is on Trump's side, not the Democrat side. Fate is on Trump's side, not on the Democratic side. It's really important that when you fight against somebody like Trump, that you don't miss. And the Democratic strategy was just to keep coming for him with the intention of getting him eventually. Something will land on him. Something will take him down. And they just kept missing, and they just kept making him more powerful each time. And that was a mistake. And I think Democrats are looking at that now and saying, if we're going to come for him, it better be something that we can definitely get him on. We can't lose again. We can't fail again. And I think that's why you're seeing, one of the reasons why you're seeing them sort of take a slow approach to opposition this time. He came back, right? We tried to impeach him twice. He wasn't convicted and didn't learn a lesson. You know, one of the things that a lot of impeachment advocates in 2019 said was that even if we don't convict and remove Donald Trump, impeaching him will at least send the message that this behavior is unacceptable. Instead, it sent the message that this behavior is totally acceptable as long as the Senate's willing to acquit you. It only made the situation worse. You know, we tried to prosecute Trump, and there's a lot of criticism over the speed in which Merrick Garland, when he was Attorney General, tried to prosecute him. But we tried that, and it didn't work. None of this stuff mattered. And ultimately, what ended up happening is the public just got burnt out from all the opposition. So maybe the lesson to take from 2017 and 2019 is that you do more of a Nancy Pelosi 2005 type of opposition where you sit back and wait for Trump to screw up and then pounce whenever he does something that the public dislikes, instead of trying to lead the public when they don't really want to be opposed to him. You know, one of the things that people have talked about in the last few months is how the culture has changed and how, you know, MAGA and conservatism has sort of taken over the culture in a way that it hasn't since post 9/11 society. And I think that's probably true. This is the most conservative culture that I think I've experienced since the post 9/11 social dynamic, which was far worse than what you're experiencing now, if I'm being honest. But that didn't last. And within 3 or 4 years after 9/11, the culture began to shift back to a more liberal focus. Largely, that was not because of any messaging that the Democrats or progressive movement had, but because of the screw-ups of the Bush administration. It was because he tried to privatize Social Security. It was because he went too far on issues like abortion and social conservatism. It was because the Iraq War went badly. It was because of libertarians fighting him on the Patriot Act. It was because of scandals like the Scooter Libby scandal. All of those things happened, allowed Democrats to take advantage, allowed liberals to take advantage, and to shift the culture more in their favor, both in politics and in society as a whole. And that's the only way you can really do it. There's no other way you can do it. And a lot of progressives want to believe that you can go out there and message and shift people to your way. But your message is only really effective when the other side is screwing up. And that was true of MAGA as well. Their message would not have been effective if not for some of the negative things that happened during the Biden administration. If Afghanistan didn't go bad, if the migrant crisis hasn't happened, if crime hadn't gone up after COVID, if there wasn't lagging COVID restrictions, especially with education, into 2021 and 2022, if inflation wasn't bad, you know, if all of these things hadn't happened, MAGA would not have had a renaissance. No matter how good they messaged, no matter how well they were able to sort of capture the culture, it would not have happened. And all of that stuff was also downwind of the issues like trans issues that also move people. You know, one of the things that happened in the last few years is big tech became completely enveloped in the MAGA umbrella. And the reason why that happened was that the Biden administration decided to go after big tech monopolies, which is not something that Democratic administrations have done since the Lyndon Johnson days. People hate when I say it, but Joe Biden had the most economically progressive administration since Lyndon Johnson. And it didn't go well because the people that he alienated, the tech billionaires that he alienated, were very important to the Democratic coalition under Obama and under the early Biden years, and they were anti-Trump. And going after them was supposed to bring in the working class, and it didn't either. And because they were so powerful, they were able to sort of capture the new forms of media, and they were able to propagandize against the administration, especially on immigration and inflation and on issues like trans issues, which there's been a public shift against in the last few years, largely because of a lot of the propaganda that was pushed around. And liberals and Democrats as well, so I'm not just looking at the left here and criticizing them. I think Democrats have followed the left off this cliff, ignored it. They didn't believe that the MAGA propaganda would be effective, and they didn't want to believe it. And I know this very well because I was one of those people who, since the pandemic, have been warning people on the left and in the Democratic establishment that this propaganda is working, and it's moving people against you, and you need to be aware of this. But no one believed it. No one believed that Donald Trump could mount the comeback that he did, right? And I think that was part of the problem that happened, and Democrats now are trying to figure out what their next step is, because the go-to default way of resisting the Trump administration and being in opposition, it didn't work last time. In the long run, it didn't work. And Democrats don't want another repeat of this where they spend the next 4 years wall-to-wall in opposition. Maybe they win in 28, and then they just exhausted everybody. And then they have to deal with it again. And so they want to figure out a way of building a sustained opposition that will sustain beyond the next election. And that's going to take time. And honestly, and I said this before, the only way that they're going to be able to regain the message, and the only way they're going to be able to regain support, is for Trump to screw up. They can't do anything. Democrats can't offer an alternative vision, as many progressives say, and win, because people aren't going to listen to them. They aren't going to care. If you are selling a product and your competitor is selling a product, and your competitor's product works fine, everyone loves it, no one has a problem with it right now, and it's going off the shelves, no one's going to buy your product. There's no other way you can do it. And a lot of progressives want to believe that you can go out there and message and shift people to your way. But your message is only really effective when the other side is screwing up. And that was true of MAGA as well. The MAGA Renaissance would not have happened without some of the bad stuff that happened during the Biden presidency. If not for the withdrawal of Afghanistan going badly, if not for inflation, if not for the migrant crisis, if not for Biden pissing off big tech by sicking Lena Khan on him and leading them to buy up all of the online media and use it to propagandize the country against progressives and liberals, if not for COVID restrictions going on a lot longer than they should have, if not for mask mandates and vaccine mandates and school closures. If those things hadn't happened, if those things hadn't negatively polarized people against Biden and the Democrats, the MAGA Renaissance would not have happened. And the same thing is going to be true of Democrats going forward and progressives going forward. No success is going to happen without Trump screwing up. The good news is that Trump will almost certainly screw up, and he's starting to already. And so that's going to be what drives people back to the Democratic Party and to liberalism. And that's going to take a lot of time. And so it's not going to happen in the first few months. Let's take a look at 2009. That's a good place to look at here. The Republican Party, coming out of Obama's election inauguration, was barely functioning as a movement. I mean, it was kind of a joke as a party, and no one expected them to recover anytime soon. They were in far worse straits than the Democratic Party is today. And it was about 2 or 3 months into Obama's term when there was a noticeable vibe shift. And it started when Barack Obama proposed to bail out delinquent mortgages, hoping that would help the economy recover. It was a proposal called Cram Down. Basically, he was going to spend taxpayer money to bail out mortgages, which would have actually helped a lot, but it was fairly unpopular and people didn't like it. It left a bad taste in people's mouths. This was when Rick Santelli on CNBC lit the spark that started the Tea Party, when he ranted against Cramdown and demanded to President Obama and said to him, "Are you listening to us?" and had traders at the Chicago Board of Trade join him in screaming no at the president. And this was still about a month or two into Obama's term. The tide did not start to turn against the Democrats in 2009, 2010 until the summer. And it was in July, when the jobs reports were still bad, that people began to notice that there was a shift against Obama and the Democrats that led to the Tea Party wave in 2010. There's still plenty of time ahead of us. And so if you're looking at February 5th and wondering why there isn't an organized opposition, you need to be patient, because if things go as badly as they appear to be going already, by the summer you will see a sustained opposition and you'll see a sustained backlash. I'm already noticing, and I'm not sure if any of you are noticing it too, but I'm noticing some Trump people beginning to express some reservations about some of his moves. I'm beginning to notice some of the classical liberal free speech advocates who were angry at Democrats and angry at liberals throughout the first Trump term and throughout the Biden term, on issues like trans rights, on issues like political correctness, on issues like anti-racism, who are already looking at some of the things that Trump has been doing on the social justice side and talking about how they are opposed to it. Some of these people I've followed and read and listened to since 2015. And back then they were super anti-PC, super libertarian, and super anti-trans. And they've been that way going into 2024, and they were clearly fairly supportive of Trump. They've sort of reacted negatively to some of the moves that Trump has made, even at repealing DEI stuff, and are concerned that he's not operating to push fairness, but basically to sort of do the opposite of what liberals did with DEI and making it more of a whites first mentality. A lot of these free-thinking classical liberals, as they call themselves, are angry about the president's plan to send American prisoners, American citizens who are in prisons, to El Salvador. He recently sent Secretary of State Marco Rubio to El Salvador to strike a deal with the Salvadorian president, who was a Trump ally, to pay El Salvador to house our prisoners. And a lot of these anti-PC classical liberals who were friendly to Trump before the election are angry about it, and they're beginning to question their support of Trump. And so I think there's already some seeds there of opposition and vibe shift that start to form, but it's going to take a lot of time for that to sort of fester. Democrats will find their voice in opposition. It will happen, but it's going to take time. It's going to take most of this year. It's going to take a lot of screw-ups on the Trump administration's part. You know, if everything goes well, if we don't have chaos, and I don't see that happening, then the Democrats are not going to be very effective in opposition. It's just not going to happen. They're going to be very similar to what the Labour Party was in Britain during the Margaret Thatcher era, where, you know, no matter how much they screamed and yelled, things in England were fairly fine, and Thatcher was able to sort of maintain her popularity throughout the 1980s. You know, the same thing with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s in the United States. Once he tamed inflation, and once he was able to sort of present himself as the bulwark against the Soviet Union and advancing communism, Americans weren't interested in another way. They weren't interested in what Democrats had to say. They were fine with what the Republicans were doing, and so they kept reelecting Reagan, and they kept Republicans in power, you know, throughout the 1980s. And so if things do go well, then it doesn't matter what Democrats say in opposition. No one's going to care. I don't suspect that things will go well. I think that Donald Trump is not capable of running a competent government. He might be capable of trying to convince people that he's competent and he's a good businessman, but when you're running a government, it's harder to sort of present that lie because people begin to feel your failures. No one noticed when he bankrupted the casino. They will notice, though, if he bankrupts the country. And so it's harder for him to sort of keep that illusion of competence going when he's the president of the United States. Further, having Elon Musk there is going to backfire on him as well. Even though everyone thinks Elon Musk is a brilliant businessman, his experience with Tesla and Twitter in the last few years have sort of shown that whatever business success he had is not really working anymore. And I don't think that even if you are a good businessman, I'm of the opinion that the skills you use to run a good business, they don't apply to government. And I don't think that a businessman can be a good government administrator. I don't think that it's possible to have the same skills for both and be successful, but most people don't. And Elon Musk is applying the same skill set that he applied to Twitter to the government. And I don't think that's going to work. Even if it might have worked on Twitter, and I don't think it did, it's not going to work. One of my main reasons for believing that a businessman can't run a good government is that it's not the same thing. When you run a business, your focus is profit. Your focus is to turn a profit for your shareholders and to keep the business functioning. To do that, you have to sell a product that makes you money. That's your primary focus. And so you do that by only really focusing and investing on aspects of your business that gives you a return on investment. In government, you cannot do that. You cannot just focus on things that return on investment because your goal is the safety and security and the continued freedom of your citizens. That doesn't necessarily have a return on investment all the time. Sometimes it does. Happy citizens pay taxes and tax revenue comes back to you, but you still have to take care of your poor citizens who are not going to pay the same amount of taxes back to you as you are spending on them. You still have to build roads, you still have to build infrastructure, you still have to fund the military, and a lot of that stuff does not have the same return on investment that it would if you were investing in a new product for your business or a new market. For example, if you run a business, you might pull out of a market if the return on investment is not good. If it's costing you more money to serve that market than you're making back in sales and or revenue. In government, you can't do that. You can't stop serving an entire population. You can't stop protecting an entire territory because people's lives are there just because there's no return on investment. Some businessmen have do that. One of the criticisms I had with Michael Bloomberg was that he kind of did that when he ran New York City. Neighborhoods that didn't have high tax revenue, they were down on the list of services that they got. He largely focused on neighborhoods where a lot of rich people lived because it was more income tax, more property taxes, more sales taxes with people who were spending money there. And that's where the focus went. But neighborhoods where there was a lot of poor people, where the services cost more than the city was getting back in tax revenue, he kind of ignored those places. And that's kind of what you do as a businessman, right? When you apply the same thought to business, to government, you end up leaving a lot of people who need government out to dry. And that's, I think, what Elon Musk is doing. Musk is looking at the budget, going line by line and saying, this doesn't give us a return on investment. This doesn't give us a return on investment. We don't make money doing this. And that's kind of the wrong thing for him to be doing, because a lot of the stuff that the government does is not meant for them to make the money back. It's meant to keep people alive. It's meant to keep people from being murdered or starving to death. It's an investment into communities. It's not an investment into the United States government. And if Musk does that, you're going to see a lot of cuts to programs that are vital to large swaths of the country. And when that starts to sort of bleed in, when poor neighborhoods in the Midwest don't get funding for their hospitals, or don't get funding for their schools, or don't get funding for their social programs, people are going to start to get pissed about that. I'm not as confident as most people in that they're going to look at that and then be open to democratic ideas, because there's a whole other issue with the Democratic Party that makes it hard for them to even talk to much of the country. The brand is so toxic. But it will make them turn on Trump, and it will make them turn on the Republicans. And that's the opportunity the Democrats have. Now, going back to 2005, no one seriously believed that Nancy Pelosi would be Speaker of the House. And I think this is one thing they keep reminding people, and I brought up multiple times when people told me there's no way Donald Trump would ever be elected president or be elected president again. When the Democrats chose Nancy Pelosi as their leader in the early 2000s, a lot of people sort of just threw in the towel and said there's no way she would ever be Speaker of the House. No way she would ever get elected. Like, as long as she's the leader of the party, they will never win a majority in the House. And they did. And they did largely because people soured on the Republicans so much that the prospect of a Nancy Pelosi speakership and her being third in line to the presidency, or second in line to the presidency rather, was not a disqualifying factor. People were okay with that. And in the end, Pelosi ended up serving 8 years as Speaker over the course of 3 decades and was arguably, in my opinion, one of the most effective speakers that the country has ever had. She's up there with Henry Clay and Sam Rayburn. No one thought that would ever happen. And so I think people who look at Democrats today and think there's no way this party or these people could ever become national figures, they're deluding themselves. a lot can happen in the next few years where even someone like AOC could be viable on a national stage. I think she's already damaged goods, if I'm being honest, but I think there are people who Democrats are not even considering because they don't think that they would ever really play nationally, who over time, if things go bad enough, they will play nationally. And so I think a lot of people need to be patient because the Democrats are not going to replay what they did in 2017 and 2018, and they shouldn't replay what they did at that time. They need to be a little bit more strategic about being in opposition now than they were 8 years ago. And I think that's what you're going to see in the next few years. Keep an eye on that, and you'll see it probably happen over the course of the next 6 months or so. And let's revisit this and see where we are in late summer. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Here's a Wild Thought. If you like what you saw, feel free to share, subscribe, tell all your friends about it. You can find me on Patreon. If you want to share some feedback or you have any questions, comments, concerns, you want to yell at me, feel free to reach out. I read everything that I get, and I will see you on the next episode.